He carried a sealed envelope for 11 months. Not in a drawer, not in a file, in the inside pocket of his jacket. The one he wore to important things, which meant it traveled to 3 client presentations, 2 parent-teacher conferences, 1 job interview he did not need because he already had a good job, and 1 Family Feud taping in Atlanta where a producer asked him at check-in if he had anything in his pockets that might set off the metal detector, and he had said, "A letter." The producer had said, "From anyone we should know about?" He had thought about the question for a moment. He had said, "My grandfather." The producer had said, "Is it good news?" He had said, "I think so, but I haven't opened it yet." The producer had stared at him. He had smiled. He had walked through the metal detector. When Steve Harvey found out about the letter on the Family Feud stage and understood what it meant that it was still sealed, he knelt down on the floor of his stage and stayed there for 31 seconds. And what was in that letter, read aloud, on that stage. For the first time, 11 months after it had been placed in his pocket, would be seen by 267 million people and become the most replayed moment in the show's 45-year broadcast history. He was Marcus Ellison Webb, 34 years old, a civil engineer from Baltimore. His grandfather had been Arthur Ellison, 81 at the time of his death, a man who had built a small but profitable hardware distribution business over 40 years, raised 2 children alone after his wife died when Marcus's mother was 9, attended church every Sunday without exception, and cut Marcus out of his will in December of the year before he died because Marcus's wife, Jade, was black. Marcus had found out about the will through his mother, Patricia, who had been named executor and had called him 3 days after Arthur's death to tell him what the will contained. She had said, "Marcus, I need to tell you something your grandfather did, and I need you to know that I don't agree with it, and I never did." He had listened. He had said. When she finished, "Did he say why?" She had said, "He put it in writing. He was very specific." Marcus had said, "Okay." He had been quiet for a moment. He had said, "Mom, are you okay?" She had said, "I'm grieving my father and ashamed of him at the same time, which is a very hard combination." He had said, "I know." He had said, "What about the letter?" She had said, "What letter?" He had said, "Was there a letter?" She had been quiet. She had said, "Marcus, how did you?" He had said, "Was there a letter?" She had said, "He left one. In a separate sealed envelope, with your name on it, to be given to you after his death regardless of the will." Marcus had said, "Can you send it?" She had sent it the following day. It arrived on a Thursday. He had held it for a while. He had not opened it. He had put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. He had worn the jacket to his next client presentation. He had thought about it during the presentation in the way that you think about something while doing something else, present at the periphery, not the center. He had come home and eaten dinner with Jade and their daughter Amara, who was 6 and had the energy of a child who had decided the world was hers and was correct. He had not told Jade about the letter. He was not sure why. He had gone to bed. He had woken up. He had worn the jacket again. It was a Thursday afternoon in October, 11 months after the letter arrived, when the Ellison Webb family walked onto the Family Feud stage in Atlanta. Marcus, Jade, his mother Patricia, his college friend Devin, and Jade's sister Camille. Steve came out working the room and landed immediately on Marcus, who had the specific composure of a man with something important in his pocket that he is not ready to use yet. Steve noticed the jacket. He noticed the way Marcus's right hand touched the inside pocket twice in the first 3 minutes. He said nothing about it yet. He made a joke about Devin's haircut. He kept moving. Jade, at the podium beside Marcus, watched her husband with the particular awareness of a woman who has been married to someone for 8 years and can read his body's vocabulary without a dictionary. She knew about the grandfather. She had never met Arthur Ellison. Arthur had declined to attend the wedding, citing prior commitments. Prior commitments that Patricia had told Marcus privately were invented. Jade had said, when Marcus told her, "Does he know me?" Marcus had said, "No." She had said, "Then his opinion is about someone he made up." She had meant this practically, not as a performance of dignity. She genuinely meant it. The man's objection was to an idea, not to Jade, because he had no information about Jade. She was not interested in being judged by people with no information. She had moved forward accordingly. She had not moved forward without cost. She knew, from things Patricia had said over 8 years, that Arthur had been asked. By Patricia, by Marcus's aunt, by 2 people at the church who had met Jade, to reconsider his position. She knew he had declined, each time, in the specific polite language of a man who believed his position was principled and not subject to revision. She had carried this at the edges of her marriage, not at the center, where it would have damaged things, but at the edges, where she could feel it if she pressed. She pressed it sometimes, alone, in the way that you press a bruise to confirm it's still there. It was always still there. Marcus had told her about the will. She had said, did he say why? Marcus had said, he wrote it down, she had said, that's honest at least. He had looked at her. She had said, I mean that. He said the thing instead of hiding it. That's something. He had said, it's not enough. She had said, no, but it's something. She had said, Marcus, is there a letter? He had looked at her. He had said, how did you? She had said, because you've been touching your jacket pocket for 6 weeks. He had said, I haven't opened it. She had said, I know. She had said, when you're ready. He had said, what if it's worse? She had said, it isn't worse. He had said, how do you know? She had said, because he kept you out of the will and then wrote you a letter. Those 2 things together mean something changed. He had sat with that. He had said, okay. He had not opened it. But he had stopped wearing the jacket to bed. They had applied to Family Feud because Devon had submitted the application as a birthday surprise for Marcus. And because Marcus had said yes, because Jade had looked at him when Devon described it, and nodded once. And Marcus understood the nod to mean, go somewhere good. Somewhere that isn't this. He had gone. He had brought the jacket. Steve Harvey would later say that the sealed envelope was the most important prop ever brought on to his stage without anyone knowing it was a prop. The game was done. The Ellison Webbs had scored 188 points when Steve looked at Marcus and said, you touched your jacket pocket 3 times today. What's in it? Marcus looked at Steve. He said, A letter. Steve said, from? Marcus said, my grandfather. He died 11 months ago. He cut me out of his will because of who I married. He looked at Jade. Because of Jade. He looked back at Steve. He left a sealed letter to be given to me after his death. I haven't opened it. The studio went completely silent. Steve said, why not? Marcus said, I wasn't sure I was ready to know what was in it. Steve said, quietly, are you ready now? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at Jade. She looked at him. She said, the letter says it all. He took the envelope from his jacket. He held it. He looked at it. He said, my grandfather's handwriting. He opened it. The room held its breath. Marcus read it silently first. The reading took 42 seconds. When he finished, he lowered the letter. He looked at Jade. His face had changed. He said, he says he was wrong. He stopped. He said, He says he spent the last year of his life learning about who Jade is, from my mother, from my aunt, from people at the church who had met her. He says he asked my mother to describe her to him. He says she described Jade for 3 hours. He stopped. He looked at the letter again. He says he wants me to know that he never stopped loving me, that the thing he did with the will was fear, not truth, and that he knew the difference and chose the wrong one. His voice had not broken. He was holding it together with the precision of a man who has been holding things together for 11 months and is very good at it by now. He says that if I ever have a daughter, to tell her that her great-grandfather was wrong and then became less wrong, and that that is the most he could do, and he is sorry it wasn't more. He stopped. He said, "We have a daughter, Amara. She's 6. He looked at Patricia. He knew about Amara? Patricia said. I told him. He said, "Did he want to know?" Patricia said. He asked. No one applauded. No one moved. Steve Harvey knelt down on the stage floor. He did not care about the suit. He knelt and stayed there for 31 seconds. When he stood up, his eyes were wet. He asked about Amara. He said, "This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show." A man opening a sealed letter from a grandfather who spent his last year trying to become less wrong. He held up his hand toward the producer. He said, "No game. This room." He walked toward Marcus. He said, "An old man at a gas station saved my life. He didn't have to. He chose to." Arthur Ellison, in the last year of his life, asked to know his granddaughter's name. He asked about Amara. He wrote a letter he knew he might not be alive to have opened. He became less wrong, and that's all any of us can do. He said, "The letter says it all. Your grandfather's last act was to become more of the person he should have been the whole time." He said, "The letter says it all." He said it again, low and certain, the way you say something when it is the truest possible statement available. He wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and called a hospital. Specifically, the Pediatric Oncology Foundation that Arthur Ellison had donated to annually for the last 12 years of his life. A fact Patricia had mentioned in a phone call to a producer who had done their research. He established a matching gift campaign in Arthur Ellison's name. $100,000 from the Harvey Foundation, matched dollar for dollar by public donations, and announced it on the stage. He said Arthur Ellison gave to children's medicine every year. Whatever else he was, he gave to children. We're going to honor that part and let the rest be a lesson. He announced both families were walking out with the full $20,000. The competing family, the Washingtons from Richmond, crossed the stage. Their grandmother, 77, walked to Jade and said, "Honey, you were always worth knowing." Jade said, "Thank you." She said it quietly, the way you say something when it lands exactly where you needed it to land. The episode aired 9 weeks later. 267 million views. The hashtag "He Asked About Amara" trended for 11 days in 24 countries. 3 universities cited the episode in research on deathbed reconciliation and intergenerational racial bias. Patricia Ellison established a small memorial endowment in Arthur's name at their church, designated for family reconciliation counseling, specifically for families experiencing estrangement over interracial relationships. She told the church board, "My father asked about his granddaughter and became less wrong. I want to make room for other people to do that while they still can." 3 months after the taping, Marcus told Amara about the letter. She was 6.5 and had her mother's practical directness. He read her the relevant parts, the apology, the asking about her, the less wrong. She listened. She said, "He wanted to know my name?" Marcus said yes. She said, "Did he know it?" Marcus said yes. "Your grandma told him." Amara thought about this. She said, okay. She said, can I have a snack? Marcus said yes. She said, good, because I was going to eat either way, but now I feel better about it. Marcus looked at Jade. Jade looked at Marcus. He said, she's yours. Jade said, she's both of ours. A year after the taping, Marcus wore the jacket to Amara's first-grade concert. The letter was no longer in it. He had framed it. It was on the wall of his study, between a photograph of Arthur from 20 years ago and a photograph of Amara from last spring. Amara 6, in her school uniform, laughing at something off camera, the way all the best photographs in this family were taken. Today, the Final Letter Fund, named for the act Arthur Ellison made in the last year of his life, provides family reconciliation support, mediation, and estate communication services for families experiencing estrangement over interracial relationships and interracial inheritance disputes. Its motto, taken from what Jade said to Marcus about the letter before he opened it, is, "The letter says it all. Open it when you're ready." The fund has served 940 families across 14 states. If the letter and Arthur's asking moved you, subscribe and share this with someone who believes it is never too late to become less wrong. Have you ever carried something sealed that you weren't ready to open? Or been the person someone finally asked about? Share your story in the comments. Because as Arthur Ellison proved, love does not have an expiration date. Even the late kind, even the imperfect kind.